Man's greatest utopia is built on a horror almost beyond comprehension. We'll break down that and more as we discuss Ursula Le Guin's The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas on today's video.
We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art, and very often in our art, the art of words.
We've got an interesting video today. Yes, the story we're discussing has the aesthetics of fantasy, but more importantly, it is a thought experiment. So, as we discussed today, Ursula Le Guin's The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, you should focus less on the world she's constructed and more on how it makes you feel, on utilitarianism, on the idea of a sacrificial person or class. But let me first set the stage. The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas opens with a beautiful description of the city of Omelas itself, and the opening paragraphs remind you that you're reading the work of a master. Transports you to a land like only the best, really, fantasy or science fiction can. Omelas feels like an old world city. It's encircled by beautiful mountains on the ocean, and it's in the middle of the wonderful festival of the summer. But aside from a basic overview of the land, the narrator in The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas is purposefully unclear about the details of the city or the people that live there, choosing instead to position it, first of all, as a utopia, with the reader responsible for the details. Omelas sounds, in my words, like a city in a fairy tale. Perhaps it'd be best if you imagine it as your own fancy bits, assuming it will rise to the occasion. For certainly, I cannot suit all. For instance, how about technology? I think that there would be no cars or helicopters in and above the streets. This follows from the fact that the people of Omelas are happy. Happiness is based on a just discrimination of what is necessary, what is neither necessary nor destructive, and what is destructive. In the middle category, that of unnecessary but undestructive, of luxury, exuberance, etc., they could perfectly well have central heating, subways, washing machines, and all kinds of marvelous devices not yet invented here. Floating light sources, fuel-less power, a cure for the common cold, or they could have none of it. That, it doesn't matter, as you like it. She goes on to quite humorously explain that if the city feels too goody-goody, feel free to imagine orgies or beer. But it's a city without soldiers, one without clergy, one without a monarchy. There is a pride, but a pride not in violence or in conquering, but instead in a boundless and generous contentment, a magnanimous triumph felt not against some outer enemy, but in communion with the finest and fairest in the souls of all men everywhere in the splendor of the world's summer. However, even within this utopia, the citizens were not simple. Even though they lived a life generally free of modern pains, the bomb, economic inequality, a ruling class, these people are like us. They are ignoring the assumption, the modern assumption, that sophistication breeds pain and breeds evil. However, there's a caveat to this utopia. There is one horror on which the entirety of the city is built upon. A child forced to endure an endless torment. It could be a boy or a girl. It looks about 6, but is actually nearly 10. It is feeble-minded. Perhaps it was born defective, or perhaps it has become imbecile through fear, malnutrition, and neglect. The child is locked in this room. People only come to abuse them, to feed them enough to keep them alive, or to stare at them from outside the door. The child is aware of their suffering. Sometimes it speaks. "I will be good," it says. "Please let me out. I will be good." They never answer. The child used to scream for help at night and cry a good deal, but now it only makes a kind of whinnying, "Ee-haw, ee-haw," and it speaks less and less often. It is so thin that there are no calves to its legs, its belly protrudes, it lives on a half bowl of cornmeal and grease a day. It is naked, its buttocks and thighs are a mass of festered sores as it sits in its own excrement continually. However, despite what you may think, this child is not a secret to the citizens of Omelas. In fact, everyone knows of the child, everyone knows of its suffering, and everyone also understands that their happiness, the utopia of their city, depends wholly on the misery of this child. If it were brought to the surface, all the beauty and delight of Omelas would wither and be destroyed. And it's not that people don't care or are unfeeling. Everyone is introduced to the child when they themselves are still young but old enough to understand, before even their pre-teenage years. They inevitably feel disgust, anger, a desire to help the child, a feeling of great injustice, things the citizens of Omelas normally aren't confronted with. Yet having to live in this situation doesn't make the people of Omelas hard or evil. In fact, it's this which makes them so kind to their own children, which facilitates their compassion. I quote, "It is in their tears and anger, the trying of their generosity and the acceptance of their helplessness, which are perhaps the true source of the splendor of their lives. Theirs is no vapid, irresponsible happiness. They know that they, like the child, are not free. They know compassion. It is the existence of the child and their knowledge of its existence that makes possible the nobility of their architecture, the poignancy of their music, the profundity of their science. It is because of this child they are so gentle, that they know if the wretched one were not there sniveling in the dark, the other one, the flute player, could make no joyful music as the young riders line up in their beauty. But there's nothing to be done. If the child were brought to the surface, not only would, for some reason, the utopia end, it being inextricably connected to the torture of the child, but also that the child themselves is too far gone, is beyond saving. But while most choose to stay in Omelas, some do not. I quote, "At times, one of the adolescent girls or boys who goes to see the child does not go home to weep or rage, does not in fact go home at all. Sometimes also a man or woman much older falls silent for a day or two, then leaves home. These people go out into the street and walk down the street alone. They keep walking and walk straight out of the city of Omelas through the beautiful gates. They keep walking across the farmlands of Omelas. Each one goes alone. Youth or girl, man or woman. Night falls, the traveler must pass down village streets between the houses with yellow lit windows and on into the darkness of the fields. Each alone, they go west or north towards the mountains. They go on. They leave Omelas. They walk into the darkness and they do not come back. The place they go towards is a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. It is possible that it does not exist, but they seem to know where they are going, the ones who walk away from Omelas." So take a second to think on this. Maybe before I start talking, give me some of your thoughts in the comments section. But one of the things I find most interesting about this story, this thought experiment, is how the reader themselves unknowingly takes part in creating the very scenario which causes the child's torture. They play a role, we play a role in imagining the utopia, and undoubtedly when you read this story, something appears in your mind's eye. That utopia ends up being built on the suffering of one child. And I also really appreciate the distinction between civilization and society with pain and suffering. There's no real logical basis behind why the child has to suffer. Their fate is simply inextricably tied to the city itself through an almost magical connection. And I do think that's meant to challenge some of our notions regarding the presence of haves and have-nots in our society. Because yes, the story is touching heavily on themes of utilitarianism, on the idea of a scapegoat as well. Because let's be honest, we can't judge those who stay in Omelas, because it's also meant to very clearly be a reflection of our real world. Children have been tortured, children have died to provide me with the things that make me happy. My cell phone, all the little bits of plastic in my house, my computer, it all comes from exploitation, from the divisions between the haves and have-nots, not only globally, but on a smaller local scale. And I also think that's why the story is very careful to not lay blame on the people of the city. They are not responsible for the child's suffering, and truly, there's nothing they can do to right the wrongs, even if they had the ability to make the decision. In fact, they're described as doing pretty much everything they can within the system to take lessons from the suffering and improve the lives of everyone around them. These are people born into a terrible system with an inability to change it. And that is why the idea of walking away from Omelas is so strange. It's described as walking ahead into a darkness, a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. it is possible that it does not exist. I think the author is trying to explain that the systems of oppression and exploitation that exist today are so baked into modern civilization, into global capitalism, that it's almost impossible to imagine an alternative, and it may not exist. And honestly, when I first read the story, I thought that to the point where maybe that's meant to be an allegory for suicide. I don't think that's really the case. I think it's simply a physical rejection of the system in a way that's not possible in the real world. But it's important that we don't know what exists on the other side, whether it's better or worse, or whether anything else is even possible. But I also think it's a reminder about utopias, about utilitarianism, the idea that there's something beyond what appears to be overall happiness, and that in a utilitarian system where the ends justify the means, elevating the overall happiness of a group means that an individual's life is ultimately sacrificed. And again, that's why it's important to explain that the people of Omelas are not simple, they're not evil, because even in the best cases, even where through incredible luck or magic, the system has played out in the very best way, there still is a victim. Because in reality, the city of Omelas is not built on a single child. It's built on millions of children and millions of people. The story was written in 1973, so Le Guin may have had slavery on her mind. Obviously, we can also think of the exploitation of the third world and more. But let me know what you guys think about this point, about utilitarianism and the scapegoat. If you're religious, there's probably a Christ-like metaphor you're seeing in this story, although choosing the burden of man's sins is a bit different than this situation. And certainly Ursula was not religious. The story also made me think of another really good fantasy short story, Poltarni's Beholder of Ocean. That's by Lord Dunsany. A little bit different, but a near utopia where people nonetheless leave. Upon climbing the mountains and seeing what's on the other side, all leave, never to return. Maybe that will be the story we cover next on the channel. I know many of you guys are a lot more familiar with my Star Wars or Halo coverage, but I think more and more, especially as, Star Wars and Halo are the way they are, we are going to explore the broader world of science fiction and fantasy. Anyway, I really look forward to reading your guys' comments on this one. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more. See you guys next time.